Welcome to the Maria Liberati Show, where food meets art, travel, and life. A special welcome to my listening audience in the USA and all over the world. What does food mean to you? While most will remember the year of 2020 for COVID-19, there are some delicious food trends we will be remembering thanks to this year. And I like to think of these trends as an Italian renaissance of sorts. Two trendy dishes for this year are lasagna and gnocchi, made with a multitude of flavors and not always traditional ingredients. These are traditional artisan dishes from the peasant kitchen of the Italian countryside that are now being elevated to new heights, from gluten-free versions to vegan, dairy-free versions, and much more. And you can check out lots of lasagna and gnocchi recipes on my blog at marialiberati.com or my culinary travel book series, The Basic Art of Italian Cooking. But my favorite food trend of 2020 is the Pinsa, or properly called the Pinsa Romana. So are you hungry yet? Hungry for a pinsa? Let's begin with something we all know and love, the pizza. Well, as legend has it, the pinsa dates back to ancient Roman times. It is now being touted as a healthier, fluffier, easily more digestible version of a pizza. What makes a pinsa different from a traditional Neapolitan pizza? Pinsare is a Latin word that means to stretch, so it is definitely stretched thinner than a traditional pizza. And we can thank Cucina Povere, the peasant kitchen, for the invention of the pinsa. Peasants in the countryside around Rome, Italy, are credited with making a pinsa from a few different grains, not just wheat. Rice flour, millet flour, oat flour, barley flour, and even spelt flour were mixed with water and stretched into an oval shape. The pinsa was then topped with fresh herbs, salt, spices, and cooked over hot coals. Today's modern pinsa, considered the Roman relative to the Neapolitan pizza, is made from a mix of flours, usually soy, rice, and wheat flours. But it is a flexible recipe based on the fact that ancient Roman peasants had to use whatever flours were available to them. And because it uses less wheat and is stretched thin, it is not as springy as the traditional pizza and yet crispy. So what's the verdict? Pizza is, well, pizza. And in my opinion, nothing can compare to a real traditional artisan Neapolitan pizza with fresh tomatoes. But the pinsa can stand on its own in that it is in its own category. Rather, a crispy version of the pizza is what a pinsa is. In my opinion, a pinsa is not to be compared or substituted for a pizza, but to stand on its own. Here's my recipe for a delicious pinsa if you want to try one of the trendy foods of 2020 before year's end. 5 1/4 cups or 660 grams of all-purpose flour or zero flour, 1/4 cup or 30 grams of soy flour, 2 cups or 500 grams of water, 1/4 cup or 30 grams of rice flour, 3/4 tablespoon or 10 grams of extra virgin olive oil, a teaspoon of dried yeast, 2 cups of chopped cherry tomatoes, 1 cup of shaved Pecorino Romano cheese, fresh or dried oregano, salt and pepper to taste, extra virgin olive oil to drizzle on top, chopped fresh parsley to serve with the pizza. Directions: place all flours in a large bowl with yeast. Whisk the flours together. Slowly add in cold water, continuously whisking. Add in the olive oil and salt and mix by hand. Mix well. Form into a soft, smooth ball. Leave it in the bowl and cover the bowl with plastic wrap. Place in the refrigerator and let it rise for 24 hours. After 24 hours, remove it from the fridge. Place on a floured surface and divide the dough into 4 balls. Cover each one with plastic wrap and let rise for 3 hours. After 3 hours, place parchment paper on a baking sheet for each pinsa. Place each pinsa ball on a baking sheet. Stretch and knead into an oval shape. Cover with a linen towel and let rise for 1 hour. Repeat with all 4 pinsa balls. Chop the cherry tomatoes and place in a bowl with olive oil and salt. Let marinate for a few minutes. After the dough has risen for an hour, bake in a preheated oven at 450 degrees for 15 minutes until the edges have browned. Remove from the oven, topped with chopped tomatoes, pecorino, Romano cheese, fresh oregano, salt, and pepper to taste, and drizzle with olive oil. Serve with fresh chopped parsley on top. So what's trending for wine in 2020? It's enotourism, traveling for wine. But since most of us can't travel for wine this year, my guest for this week's podcast will help us travel from home through wines, and the wines will travel to us. Today's topic is trends in food and wine, and I've invited a special guest that could really give us some information on this trend in wine that it has been going on for a while, but it's these local artisan wines that are really difficult to find, and they come from these small producers, especially in Italy. And today my guest is Tony Margiotta. He's the author of Hidden Gems of Italy, and he'll tell us what that wonderful book is about. But he's also the owner of Gladiator Wine Distribution. They're distributor and importer of artisan wines from Italy, these really special wines. Welcome, Tony. Thanks for how you're doing.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Maria.
So why don't I just jump in and ask you to give our listeners some background on global wine distribution, and what was your inspiration for that venture?
So, Gladiator Wine was sort of the result of several life experiences, and the story goes all the way back to my father, who comes from a small region in southern Italy called Molise, and he came to America with my grandparents back in the 1970s, and so there was always wine at the table growing up. My grandfather was an avid wine drinker. That passion came from basically having their own vineyard. The family had their own small vineyard in Molise. They didn't sell the wine commercially. They just made wine for themselves. They made about 500 liters of wine a year, which was just enough to get to the next harvest. So big wine drinkers in the family. Around the early 1980s, my father ended up buying a liquor store. I basically grew up watching him sell wine, beers, and spirits in Wilmington, Delaware through the 80s and 90s. And so fast forward a few more years, in the year 2000, my grandmother passed away. She had gone back to their village of Montaquila in Molise maybe about 3 times between the early 70s when she came to America and until the day she passed away.
Mhm.
But my father hadn't been back in 25 years.
Wow.
So we were planning to do this trip all together. My grandmother always wanted us, my sister and I, to go to her home village to introduce us to the family. We've got like over 50 cousins in this little village. And so anyway, we went anyway that summer in the year 2000, and I fell in love with Italy on that trip. The food, the culture, of course, the wines. And so from that point on, I went back every summer for many, many, many years, and I dedicated myself to reading, learning, speaking Italian, which I did. I learned it mostly by being in my aunt's kitchen in Molise, who didn't speak a word of English. So that's pretty much how I learned Italian. And every time I would take these trips, I would, I would stop into my aunt's place and hang out for, a few days, drop off my stuff, and then I start traveling around the country. So I went all the way up north to the Alps, all the way down to the south in Sicily, Puglia, Campania, Florence. I've been to all the big cities, and I just really immersed myself into the food, wine, and culture there. Basically, once I would come back to New York after one of those trips, I would run to my local wine shop in New York to pick up a bottle of Italian wine to sort of relive the moment, as it were. Unfortunately, every time I would pick up a bottle of wine in my local New York wine shop, I was always somewhat disappointed with what I was drinking. It never was quite as good as the wines I was drinking when I was in Italy. And so I used to ask myself, was it the ambiance, to be in Italy, the wine just tastes better because you're in Italy? I don't think that was the case. And then some people told me, oh, they don't put sulfites in the wines in Italy, and that's why they're so much better.
Mhm.
And that turned out not to be the case either. And so, I discovered that even like the house wines in Italy in the restaurants, that they pour in the carafes, it's the house wine. Those
Yes.
those wines are better
Mhm.
than many of the Italian wines that are on the shelves in your local wine shops here in the United States. If I went into a restaurant and I ordered the house wine and I was in Italy and I liked the wine, I would always ask the owner of the restaurant, who made this wine? It's so good. And
Mhm.
I'd always get this ambiguous answer. And they'd always say a local producer. They'd never give me a name. It was always local producer, right?
Yeah.
So it would take me a few more years and a few more trips to finally figure out who these local producers are. And what they really were, for the most part, are these small artisanal producers that don't make a lot of wine, but the quality of the wine is noticeably different. So much so that I really believe just about anyone can taste the difference. And so that's really where the idea of the Gladiator wine distribution, I decided to open this importing company to support these smaller vineyards who really don't have much representation outside of the local areas where they're from. The local areas where they're from, they are like the kings of the hill. They are super well respected. When I
Yeah.
when I went to Sicily and I was asking around about this particular producer I was interested in, I would mention their name, and all of a sudden, the waiters would get on their knees and bow, like, "Oh yes, this particular producer is amazing." And yet, outside of Sicily, very, very unknown wines. And so that's really it's sort of this company came about. It was just really years and years of things sort of coming together, and it made sense. So
Well,
that's really where.
inspiration was, and that makes sense, and I think it's so wonderful, as I had mentioned to you, that you're doing this because it gives people a chance to really experience the real wines from the artisan wines from Italy. That's the real deal. The stuff, just as you said, a lot of the stuff that they're getting at liquor stores are, the stuff that everybody's going for or advertised and stuff are not really the heart and soul of Italy. They really need to taste those wines that you're bringing in to really get a feel for, that the real heart and soul of Italy. I don't know how to describe it, but
No, that's a great
you
description.
know exactly what I mean. Yes, and
Yeah.
I say heart and soul because you probably know, you've met these people, these local producers, they put their heart and soul into producing the wine, which is why the wine is just so wonderfully tasting. It's just a whole different thing. So I'm definitely with you there. I can see where you got your inspiration from.
Yeah. And these small producers, they tell me all the time. They say, Tony, we can make as much wine as you want. We have all the land that we need. We can certainly produce larger volumes of wine. However, at a certain point, as the production levels go up, the quality noticeably goes down.
Oh
That
yeah.
was another aha moment that I had no idea about.
So yeah, so that is probably why then, a lot of like larger brands that are in the liquor stores that are producing enough wine to feed the world, the quality's not there.
Yeah, it's really not there, and quite frankly, sometimes you can taste it, that the
Mhm.
quality's not there, and other times
Yes.
you can't taste it because of all the modern technologies that are available in the wine cellars and all the additives that are allowed to go into wine. It can virtually be undetected even with some of the best tasters out there.
Oh, wow. So they're able to duplicate that. Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
It's a little scary.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It's amazing but scary. So on your Vimeo, channel, I guess that is, you have a series of crash courses on different wine locations. How much research has gone into that process? And let us know, like, what are some of your favorite areas for wine? Do you have some specific favorites?
Yeah, I'm very passionate about the entire peninsula and the islands. I think it's such a small country, Italy, and
Mhm.
yet the breadth and depth of culture that can be found in these different pockets of this peninsula are so deep that I know that I could spend the rest of my life exploring it and I still won't see or taste or experience all of it. And that's sort of the magic of that country. Yes, I have videos on Vimeo, and I also have a channel on YouTube called Gladiator Wine TV.
Okay.
And I just recently released a series of videos. There's about 20 of them. Each video is a crash course in a different region in Italy. So Italy's, made up of 20 regions. So I
Right.
created 20 different crash course videos. They're about 10 minutes each.
Uh-huh.
Instead of creating a video and saying, okay, this is a region called Tuscany, and these are the types of wines that they make in Tuscany, and be the end of the story. Instead, what I do is I start off with giving the history of that particular region as it relates to wine. And so each crash course begins with the story of the region, and I do that because when you're drinking a bottle of Italian wine, having some sense of where it comes from and who made it, and sort of the story of that region finds itself, I believe, in a good bottle of wine from that region. It's part of its identity. And so when you start to taste Italian wines like that, in terms of, it's not just an Italian wine, it's an Italian wine from Puglia, it's an Italian wine from Friuli Venezia Giulia, and so because of that, there's a story in the bottle, and I think tasting that way sort of takes away the commodity of wine, where people just taste it based on a technical level. Oh, I can taste the blackberry notes and the tobacco notes. How many times can you say the word blackberry, tobacco, and sour cherry, which are like some of the most common flavors in
Yes.
wine? After a while, they're all the same, right?
They're all the same. Yes, and the thing I love, I don't want to interrupt you because I love what you just said, but that's actually my reason for falling in love with food when I was in the culinary arts when I first started in Italy, because it's exactly what you said. The food there also has a story to it. So it's not just like, okay, I'm eating a hamburger. No, it's you're eating something that has such a story and a history related to it, like all the, Parmigiano Reggiano, there's such a history to it and a backstory, and the wines that you're talking about have exactly right. They're stories in a bottle. So it makes it so much more interesting when you taste these, and how I love that you're relating the wine to the region, because it's really important even with foods how they relate to the region. Why is that food particularly a specialty in that region? The same thing, I'm sure, with the wines and those grapes, and what's the story to them. So it just kind of blew my mind that, oh my gosh, because you're not really used to that here. Everything just has this history and backstory to it and related in some way to art and culture. And so I definitely agree with you there. And I like that idea for the videos. So, definitely recommending if anybody wants to learn. That sounds like a great way
Yeah,
to
yeah.
a crash course, quickie course to teach people about this stuff. And especially now, hey, you really can't go to Italy, at least yet, for a while. So if you want to learn about that and you have the time now, if you're home, hey, it's a great way to get a crash course on these wines, and then maybe even order some, which is, I think that's fun. You're able to do that online.
It was a lot of fun doing, and it took me like more than 80 hours of research to put that all together. So
I can imagine.
yeah.
I can imagine. Yes. So do you have any favorite wine and food pairings?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, in general,
Mhm.
I I get really excited about what we call regional wine pairing.
Yes. Hmm.
So those are dishes and wines that are specialties in the same region. So,
Hmm.
for example, a dish I really like to eat in the summertime is called pasta alla Carlo Fortina. Pasta alla Carlo Fortina is a Sardinian pasta dish,
Hmm.
and it's a white pasta. They usually use le trofie for the
Hmm.
pasta base. There's tuna, there's pesto, there's onion, olive oil, and we pair it with a vermentino di Sardegna.
Oh, yes. Wow. Oh, you're making me hungry. That sounds really
Yeah,
good.
it has cherry tomatoes too. If you as a
Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's a fantastic summer dish.
I just want to mention, so yes, and you also mentioned that regional idea, which in Italy, generally you pair wines. You just said this, but it's exactly right. You pair wines with the dishes from that region, and that's the perfect pairing because the food is just in sync with the grapes that are grown on the earth in that same region, correct?
Yeah, it's really a magical thing because
Yes.
it really takes the thinking out of it all too. I
Uh,
mean, let's just say you don't know any dishes from Sardinia. All you
uh,
do is go on Google and look up Sardinian pasta dishes,
mhm.
and all you have to do is just pick a wine from the region, and it's going to deliver what you're looking for.
Exactly, and there's not any, just like you were saying earlier, blackberry and tobacco and strawberry flavors and all that nonsense, where this is like if you've never done this type of wine pairing, it is magic. It is. There's no other word to describe it. It's just like, you've never done a real wine pairing if you haven't done this regional type of thing that we're talking about here. So,
Yeah, and when they go together, it's just the tasting
isn't
experience goes from 10 to 100.
it does, it does. It's just, you sit there, right, and you're, like, in another world because 'cause you're just like, "Oh my gosh, does it get any better?"
Yeah, yeah. So I love pairing based on regional pairings because it really takes out the technical side of it. You know, when you hear people talking about wine pairings, they're always talking about fat and acidity all the time, and
Yes.
that drives me up the wall. Uh,
And I can understand why, exactly. They just don't get it, and they don't realize if they just do and it's so simple. It's just as simple as you said, now go online, as we're saying, people can't go to Italy, so you can go online, you can find a dish that's from the region that that wine is from, and I think that's a really fun, Friday night or Saturday night
yeah,
type of a meal. Hey, decide on what kind of a wine you want to get. Anthony's got it. Find whatever region you want to go online, figure out a dish from that region. Once the wine arrives, you have an interesting night in wherever the place is that you want to be just by, making the dish and getting the wine to pair with it. Oh yeah, that's,
yeah.
definitely a no-brainer. So
So
that
here's
oh,
a few. You want to know a few others?
yes. Oh, yes, definitely. Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
like also like eggplant parmesan.
Mhm.
I love pairing it with Nero d'Avola or Negro Amaro from Puglia.
Yes.
Uh,
Mhm,
go either way.
mhm,
Then there's pasta alle vongole,
mhm.
pasta with clams.
Yes.
I like pairing that with Fiano di Avellino from
Mhm.
Campania. Then there's lasagna. I like
Uh-huh.
going with a Sicilian pericone,
Uh-huh.
and then for the classic Italian American dish, what's that? Spaghetti and
Spaghetti
meatballs,
meatballs.
right?
Yeah.
Right. So I would pair like an Aglianico or Montepulciano d'Abruzzo, and
Uh-huh.
you know, and you're in good shape.
They're really great pairings that Anthony said, and if anyone has not tried this type of wine pairing, I definitely recommend it. You'll never go back to the other, very technical. You'll always want to stick to this. This is the best way to pair wine. So I just wanted to make sure, I don't want to forget your book. It's really very, very interesting, and I recommend that also, for especially for those that are really interested in learning more about wine and local wines and just love reading about Italy. Hidden Gems of Italy is your book. And I just want to mention too, so my topic is on trends in food and wine also. So, this has been an ongoing trend of getting wines that are also artisan produced, just like food, local and artisan produced. Your book, Hidden Gems of Italy, it's full of great information that really anyone can learn from. So I guess my question is, so what set you out on this journey to writing the book on top of everything else that you're doing?
Yeah, I know. I'm always busy doing something. Uh, so, personally, I'm an avid book reader. Just in general, I read about all kinds of different things. I love reading, but I also own tons of wine books. And what I find in the world of wine books is that there's basically like three types of wine books that you find out there that happen over and over and over again. That's what I call the encyclopedic book. That's like a reference book. They're typically very thick and lots of pages, lots of information. It's sort of information overload, as it were, as a reference book. Then you've got the wine 101 books. These are the books that try to simplify wine education for beginners. There's a million of those books. And then you'll see some what I call regional books that pop up here and there. A book about Tuscan wines or a book about the wines of Barolo. You see things like that. But none of them seem to answer this one question, which is, how do you shop for a good bottle of Italian wine? So, how do you walk into a shop? Let's just say you're in the mood for an Italian wine, and you go to the Italian wine section and there's 300 wines to choose from. I mean, how do you pick a good bottle of wine? And so most people sort of stick to either what they know, a familiar name, or they'll pick up a bottle because they think the label looks cool, right? Or they'll buy it based on the price. When people do that, they're actually missing out on the greatest wine in their life that could be sitting on that shelf and never know it. And so the book is sort of a crash course in Italian wine in the context of, how do you read an Italian wine label if you don't speak Italian? Because that's really the major roadblock. People don't know what some of these other wines are. If it's not a Pinot Grigio and it's not a Chianti, it's like, what is this wine?
Right.
And so the book sort of simplifies the process on how to read wine labels and what to look for, because wine labels do have some clues on them that indicate quality. You'd be surprised at what some of the information reveals on these labels. There's basically, the big promise in the book is that there's a group of wines out there that taste much better than the price you pay. So there are plenty of Italian wines out there that cost $20, for example, that taste just as good, if not better, than some of the $50 bottles of wine on the shelf. And so I sort of work in that range of $15 to $30 bottles of wine that taste and can compete with those expensive bottles. And that's really what the book teaches people how to do.
Yes, I found that a lot of wines coming from Abruzzo, and then there's wines in Tuscany, and I'm, in Tuscany, they do spend a lot more on advertising and tourism and all than they do in Abruzzo. And I find that there are some great wines from Abruzzo that I know of from living there and family from there that are so less expensive than for instance, Montepulciano.
Yeah.
The Tuscan Montepulciano is just so much more expensive than the one from Abruzzo. At least it was for a bit. I'm not sure if that's still the way it is.
Sure. So yeah, so that's another aspect to Italian wine which can be very confusing to a lot of people. In fact, I was teaching a virtual wine class last night, and a very similar question kind of popped up, which was, I was talking about the different native grapes that are found in Italy, and how when you look at a bottle of Italian wine, sometimes it tells you what the grape varietal is on the front label, and sometimes it doesn't. Instead, it tells you where it's from. It tells you maybe the name of the town where it comes from, like Barolo, for example, or it gives you a grape name and a town where it comes from, like Barbera d'Alba, Barbera grapes from Alba.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it's like, for example, what you brought up, which is Vino Nobile di Montepulciano,
Right.
which literally means the noble wine from the town of Montepulciano. And the town of Montepulciano happens to be in Tuscany, and the wine is not made with Montepulciano grapes. It's made with Sangiovese grapes. So it creates a lot of confusion. So in Abruzzo, it's the Montepulciano, Montepulciano d'Abruzzo literally means the Montepulciano grape from Abruzzo, which is written on the label. So that's sort of one of the complex parts to learning Italian wine is knowing, which wines are named after grapes and which ones are named after places or towns, and it can all be done very easily just by picking one region at a time,
Hmm.
taking a look at what types of wines are coming out of there. And
Hmm.
it's just like when the first time you went to an ice cream store, you knew what vanilla and chocolate was, but you probably never heard of pistachio, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
the same sort of thing. And then the next time you go in there, you know what pistachio is, and then you check out another flavor.
Exactly.
It's sort of the same process.
Exactly. And it's definitely worth it if you are if you want to get more into wines and wine pairing, or just enjoy wine a lot more than what, you're doing. For anyone out there, it's a way to really, really enjoy wine. If you really want to enjoy it and learn a little bit more about Italy and the Italian wines, it's really important to do that, so you get to really experience. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. If you really want to really experience the real Italy, as we were saying earlier, the heart and soul of Italy, this is definitely the way, the way to do it. So we need to do your crash course in
Italian
wine.
wine regions.
Yes, the different regions, and your book, Hidden Gems of Italy. And I was going to ask what you want people to take out of reading the book, but I'm assuming it's what? So learning about how to buy a bottle of wine.
Yeah, how to buy a good bottle of wine for those of you who are, trying to figure out the difference between one bottle to the next. And at the end of the day, you're just looking for a great value,
Mm.
something that tastes great at an affordable price. The secret to really doing that is to seek out these small artisanal wines, because if you can find small artisanal wines that fit within your budget, you are going to drink like kings and queens.
Yeah, and I think people, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was going to say, I think people think that if a wine is extremely expensive, that means it's, oh yeah, that's the one to go to. But it's what you're saying is you may get value and actually get a better bottle of wine for a less expensive price and drink like a king. As you were saying, if you just learn how to do what Anthony's saying, learn how to read the label and kind of decipher, right? Decipher what's going on, so
Yeah,
how.
yeah, and in terms of pricing, we're in 2020. The real sweet spot for finding that needle in a haystack of a wine that tastes better than the price is somewhere between $17 and $30.
Hmm.
In that price range, there are plenty of little gems that aren't necessarily getting the attention they deserve, and
Right.
really take your palate to new and exciting destinations. I would say that anyone who says there's a $10 bottle of wine out there that tastes like $100 bottle, I would say that's a little bit far fetched. But quality wine can sort of begin in that $17 to $20 range
Hmm.
with Italian wines, which is really exciting because you can't say the same thing about California wines. Quality California wines are, you're looking at mid 30s and up. Just to get into the beginnings of a quality wine. So the economics are very different between the two places.
And then the last question is, so I always ask my guests, what does food mean to you?
Good question. For me, food is family. It's a sacred ritual that you share with the people you love. When I was growing up in Wilmington, Delaware, we used to go over to my grandparents' house every weekend. And when we walked into that front door to their house, all of a sudden I was transported to Italy, though I didn't realize it at the time. The Italian dialect was bouncing off the walls between my father and my grandparents. The tomato and garlic perfumes you could smell as soon as you opened the door in the house. And so I was really blessed to having grown up in a house where the food was simply the best. And so, your grandparents aren't going to be around forever. And if you want to eat well, you've got to learn how to cook. And so during my bachelor years in Manhattan, I was home many, many nights alone, and I had plenty of time to practice cooking. So it's very important to me. My whole family, we love cooking at home and then pairing it with great wines.
That's great. Yes, and it's so funny because anytime I ask someone that has Italian family in their background, it's similar type of answer. So it's fun. It's always fun talking because I can really relate. Tony Margiotta of Gladiator Wine Distribution, owner of Gladiator Wine Distribution, importer of artisan wines from Italy, and the author of Hidden Gems of Italy. Thank you so much for imparting us with your wisdom and giving us all this interesting information. Is there like a URL that we can give people to go to?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for a package of artisan wines from Italy, if you just go to italianwines.nyc, you'll go to that site and you'll see that there's a curated case of 12 bottles of artisanal wines from Italy, and the store will ship it to about 40 plus states. So just about all the US states can have it shipped to them in 3 to 5 business days.
Oh, well, okay. And also, people can, I'm sure, just Google your name and they'll find your crash course on wines and things like that. And I'm sure Amazon has your book, Hidden Gems of Italy.
Yes, Amazon has the book on Hidden Gems of Italy. It's in paperback and Kindle versions. And you can look me up on YouTube, Gladiator Wine TV.
Great. Thank you so much for being with us. Thanks for joining us and listening to the Maria Liberati Show. If you make the Pinsa recipe or have one to share and you want to show it off, take a picture of your dish and hashtag the Maria Liberati Show and post the photo on social media. We'll be gathering pictures and posting on my website in the next few weeks. Thanks to my producer, Britton Roselle. Go to my website, marialiberati.com, to keep up with my blog and the show and my book series, The Basic Art of Italian Cooking. Push that button to like, share with your friends. Join me on Twitter at Maria Liberati with a capital M. On Instagram at Maria Liberati and Chef_Maria Liberati. On Facebook at Chef Maria Liberati and on Pinterest at Maria Liberati. And this podcast is heard all over the world on Anchor.fm, Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Radio Republic, and more. What does food mean to you? Hashtag your answer with hashtag the Maria Liberati Show in a recorded soundbite of 60 seconds or less, a social media post of 50 words or less. Post on social media or email to maria@marialiberati.com. If selected for an upcoming podcast segment, you'll receive an autographed copy of my book, The Basic Art of Italian Cooking. I'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions or ideas for upcoming segments, email me directly at maria@marialiberati.com. Until next time, peace, love, and pasta.